Episode 3 of Season 3 of House of the Dragon explained, and if you wondered what Rhaenyra's tax policy was, well, here we go. Apart from the opening scene with Ormond surrendering Phaeron to Daemon, the entirety of this episode takes place in King's Landing and predominantly follows Rhaenyra in a sort of day-in-the-life style story. Before we get stuck in, let's take a look at Ormond and the Hightower host. Daemon is treating with the Lord Hightower whilst flanked by Hugh on Vermithor and Ulf on Silverwing. A little cheat sheet for you to tell the dragons apart. Vermithor is a more reddish dragon and is supposed to resemble a bronze colouring. It's where he gets his nickname the Bronze Fury. Silverwing has a more bluish tint whilst Seasmoke has a more greyish colour. Only Ulf and Hugh accompany Daemon here, and during the surrender, Daemon mentions to Ulf about how he feels about being granted Oldtown, which in hindsight is a poor move which we'll explore a little later on. Ormond makes a show of surrendering, unsheathing the Valyrian style sword Vigilance, the ancestral sword of the Hightowers, and bending the knee. I like that the sword is much darker to distinguish the nature of it. As it's said, Valyrian steel is often darker, almost black, rather than the clean Hollywood silver that swords are often portrayed as being. Later, it's revealed that Daeron that was surrendered was fake and the real one is still with Ormond. And the real one you've likely seen already, as it's likely this guy, Ormond Squire in episode 1, with a rather vibrant looking hair colour. I'm not sure if Condor is tipping his hat to the Phaegon storyline in the novels, but it sort of adds its own weird mix-up of storylines that I'm intrigued to see resolved. Anyway, Ormond says he'll retreat down the Rose Road back to Oldtown, but he ends up in Tumbleton, which is here. Coincidentally, Tumbleton is where Hugh Hammer says his wife fled to because she had family who lives in the flourishing market town. Strategically, Tumbleton makes for a great base as it's near a river, which is a great supply for food and water, near the Rose Road, which makes transportation a damn sight faster, and it's also rather close to King's Landing. Now, the show has the Greens infiltrating Tumbleton and taking it over from within, and then using the townspeople as human shields against Rhaenyra potentially taking it back with dragons. Dragons are not surgical tools for such a mission. The books, however, had a different approach. The Battle of Tumbleton had the Greens attack the city and the Riverland armies near it. It was more of a full-on battle with some serious consequences. They may do a version of this in the show, just slightly reversed, so I'll save the details for a later date. But one reason for why it was done this way is because the timeline isn't exactly flowing as it did in the books. At this point, the Riverland storyline is sort of wrapped up, but at the moment, Criston Cole's not even reached bloody Harrenhal, which he should have done like 3 or 4 episodes ago. Anyway, back in King's Landing, and this is the real meat of the episode. In King's Landing, Rhaenyra is monologuing how she feels about returning and standing in her father's old bedchambers, and Daemon sort of doesn't care. He wants to get back to business. Daemon's over the idea of how Viserys wanted to rule and his influence on Rhaenyra. He's living by the fire and blood mantra of his house, whilst Rhaenyra is somewhat optimistic of being a benevolent ruler. Rhaenyra then rattles off a laundry list of requirements for her coronation, such as tournaments and housing for guests who will be travelling for the event, only to receive the bombshell that the crown's a broke bitch. Tywin fucking Lannister on his way out the door had emptied the vaults and dispersed the money to Oldtown, Castle Rock and even the Iron Bank to keep it out of Rhaenyra's hands. It's here that it's officially stated that Mysaria is now on the Small Council as the Mistress of Whispers. You might remember this role from Game of Thrones, which was held by Varys, the Spymaster, whom had his little birds listening for secrets. Now, Corlys states that they must assume Tywin is dead after the battle in the Gullet, but in the books, Tywin is actually within King's Landing when Rhaenyra takes it and is held hostage. It is not a pleasant time in his life, that's all I'll say. I do have high hopes that Tywin will be washed ashore and into Rhaenyra's grasp, and we'll see how desperate things get in King's Landing and what that entails for him. Fingers crossed. But that's not all for Rhaenyra. She's been informed that the granaries are near empty and the fields are not ready for planting yet, so they need to open up trade routes. Their biggest bet will be the Reach, which is where the Greens have their biggest source of strength. The Lannisters in the west would also have some resources, but you know. And the Riverlands, well, surely they have stock. Basically, Rhaenyra has inherited a house on fire and she lit the first match. When she blockaded King's Landing, it stopped the income of goods and food from across the sea. Those ships carrying goods would have been captured by the Velaryon fleet, and the goods either taken for the Queen's own army or left rotting on the ship. Now the problem is, if there's no goods coming in, you inflict a sense of panic and hoarding. But when the market receives these ships, it's either spoilt goods or the price is going to be jacked up due to scarcity. But if a ship captain arrives with spoilt goods, he's lost money which he needs to pay his crew, and it all cascades from there. I mean, I'm not sure if there's any real life parallels to this. Essentially, not only does King's Landing have a food and gold shortage because the flow of gold isn't happening because people are desperate for food and they are not paying for other products, Rhaenyra also wants a legitimate party coronation and not the rushed job Aegon had. But really, the rushed job is the way to go at this point. Rhaenyra's response is to have the great houses send tribute as a show of strength, and Daemon approves of this, which means it's a bad idea. She also dismisses the Black Council she had gathered on Dragonstone for their role in Jace's mutiny. The party doesn't stop here as Lothar Largent implores Rhaenyra to start acquiring her own Queensguard as protection so he can go back to running the Gold Cloaks. She's then hit by a wave of servants and court members asking for her instruction, which is where a small council would come in handy, but she only has a mistress of whisperers and a hand. One servant says that he needs to requisition candles, and Rhaenyra just responds, "Do it," but he responds that he doesn't know who controls the crown's purse to enable him to do so, and he receives no answer. The Hightower controlled arbor has caused the good wine to triple in price. These are all problems within the Red Keep. Lord knows the state of the rest of the city. Rhaenyra then walks the halls of the Red Keep with Mysaria, speaking of granting clemency to Daeron before she hallucinates seeing Jace walk the halls. This causes her to change her tune and say fuck it, Daeron can get it too. She wants to be better, but the hurt of losing her sons, and any reminder of that, is going to light a fire under her and make it that much more difficult to forgive those she believed have wronged her. The next challenge for Rhaenyra is the High Septon, who's basically the Pope and the guy who anointed Aegon Targaryen as king. He refuses Rhaenyra's offer to anoint her because Aegon still lives. She tries to circumvent this by saying Aegon's dead, but the Septon is having absolutely none of this, and even calls out the dragons for being an abomination. What's interesting here is that Tolkien had his Dark Lords such as Sauron and Morgoth twist living creatures to their will, but they could not actually create life, only twist it. This Septon views the birth of dragons as something similar as the creation of dragons being for destruction and acquisition of power for the Dragon Lords, not as a need for good, but for as a tool to subjugate. He also notes that keeping him on side is very important because the people of King's Landing have one set of gods, and that is that of the Seven. Basically, don't fuck with him or make him look a fool, or soon it will be on her head when he starts giving sermons on the corruption of the Red Keep. I actually didn't realise how big the shit sandwich Rhaenyra was chewing through this episode, because next up is her bust up with Corlys, who explains that these two fine men are bastards and he wishes to have them legitimised. Rhaenyra had 3 children by Rhaenyra Velaryon. When the match was made between Viserys and Corlys, the rule was that if a child of that match came to sit upon the Iron Throne, they would be styled as Targaryen, not as Velaryon. But because there was 3 children, that was no issue, as the second born, Lucerys, would be the inheritor of Driftmark and Hightide, but he got chomped, so that fell to Joffrey, but then Jace got shot. So now Joffrey is Rhaenyra's heir, and most importantly, the last of Rhaenyra's and Laenor's 3 recognised children. In this case, Corlys' line goes dead because Baelor rejected his pleas last season. Corlys' whole cornerstone has been about legacy and how names live on. He has dodged freaking bullets. Season 1 he fought at the Stepstones and was almost killed, which caused a succession crisis in which his brother challenged the legitimacy of Lucerys' claim. Then Lucerys got chomped, Jace killed, Corlys almost bloody drowned in the gullet, and if he had, there'd be no recognised heir to Driftmark and everything he built would go to ruin. He has arguably given more than Rhaenyra for this war. He's lost his wife, his heirs, his homes, and all he asks for is his sons to be legitimised. Speaking of Velaryons, Rhaenyra does see Baelor in the hall. I'm 50-50 on whether she's ignoring her or if she was unsure if she was hallucinating as she did with Jace earlier. If they had flipped the scenes, I'd have leaned more to ignoring, but because of the Jace scene, I'm split. Rhaenyra is then unable to sleep on her own and seeks comfort with uncle husband Daemon. Yeah, the familial ties really reared their ugly heads this episode. Whilst being prepared for her day, Rhaenyra is going through the tricky process of what to wear. This reminds me of political TV shows and films where a leader wears a red or blue tie because it symbolizes something to the people. Rhaenyra wants to wear her sword, but her maid suggests it might not look inviting to people coming to petition her. Back in Game of Thrones, when Tyrion visits Robb Stark at Winterfell, Robb has his sword laid bare on his knees, which symbolizes to Tyrion he's not an invited guest and to get the hell out of here. But for Rhaenyra, that sword may also mean taking a piece of Jace with her because it was Jace's sword she carries, which is a nice detail. I also think it's a case of trying to appear more masculine and carrying a sword to gain more respect. This is all undercut by Rhaenyra coming onto her period. I really rattled my brain about the meaning of this. I initially thought they were going to play this into Rhaenyra cutting herself on the Iron Throne, as in the books when Rhaenyra sits the throne she cuts her arms and legs upon its blades. So I thought we're going to get another bloody accident. But I am glad they thought better of doing that. Instead, I see it as another reinforcement of Rhaenyra lamenting her lot as a woman. Back in episode 1, when she gave the monologue about having the weak and feeble body of a woman but the spirit of a man, I think this is just another thing she has to deal with that a male counterpart wouldn't. However, because the style of the episode being a day in the life could also just be a case of the everyday problems she has to deal with on top of trying to run a kingdom. Next up, Rhaenyra holds court and listens to the plight of her people. The Sheep's Guild are unable to produce fleeces because the sheep were taken to feed dragons. Rhaenyra retorts that it would be smarter to shear the sheep before the feeding. A butcher then laments that because the sheep are being fed to dragons, he has no meat to butcher and sell. Rhaenyra suggests the Kingswood would be scoured for food and the small folk are shocked, which Corlys then explains why, because of the forest being sacred and the royal family's personal hunting ground. We can't have the peasants touching it. Otherwise, the Kingswood is home to a few small villages and is also a place where Big Bobby B got gored by the boar. I also love how this juxtaposes Aegon's own troubles with ruling back in season 2, where Otto Hightower would intercede every decision he made. It just goes to show that despite her training, Rhaenyra is having the same troubles. Then Aemon's Dommy Mommy pops up and states how the nobles of King's Landing hoarded all the resources. Which makes sense. When food is scarce, you hoard it because you're not sure how long you're going to be without. You could sell it for a lot of gold, but what use is gold if you're starving? Now, as much as I love Daemon, I think we can all agree his political beliefs stray rather conservative. Whilst we got Bernie Saria trying to tax the rich across from him, I don't think it's a mistake that Mysaria is placed opposite to Daemon. They are going to clash constantly, with Mysaria calling Daemon a nepo baby. I'm actually amazed they were even a thing by looking at these scenes. Daemon does mention though that this type of division is what an enemy will use to strike dissent within the land, and he's not wrong. Larys Strong in the books uses the issues of King's Landing and amplifies them. We again see this in Game of Thrones where Tyrion is hated by the small folk, with people calling him the demon monkey controlling the crown. He's villainized despite trying to help the small folk, most likely at Littlefinger or Varys' behest. Despite her acting, I still think as a character Mysaria knows how to manipulate Rhaenyra. Whenever she thinks she's struggling, she'll just pull out the "what would your daddy do" card, in hopes that Rhaenyra's memory of him is better than it was. Rhaenyra continues her rake stepping by laughing at Ulf's attempt to style himself Targaryen.
Targaryen, your grace.
Oh, absolutely not.
And reinforces her decision to recognise Adam of Hull instead of Velaryon. Corlys later crashes out about this, and I can't fault him for it. The fact he does it in front of the household though, bold move and risky. Considering the servants may still contain Green loyalists, and the friction between Queen and Hand may leak, can be used against the Queen. Corlys is also lucky Daemon wasn't around because he has a thing for beheading Velaryons uttering the word bastard. Hugh tries to get a little side deal going in private, looking for a house, and Rhaenyra brushes him off when he looks for details and timelines, which, credit to him, he is persistent. Rhaenyra explains she has no small council or Queen's Guard, all things she dismantled herself and has not re-established. If she is having so much difficulty with running things, she needs to be focusing on establishing a support network to maintain these things. But I think it goes to show just how distrusting she is of people. Now, back to that moment I mentioned earlier about Daemon threatening to grant Ulf Oldtown. In the books, Daemon actually really goes to bat for the dragon seeds. That ties into his show character of respecting people who fight besides him. He says that the seats of the traitors such as Lannister, Baratheon and Hightower should be granted to Ulf, Adam and Hugh Hammer. This would be a massive move and ensure that there would be huge consequences for choosing sides in future and shake up the current status quo. Unfortunately for the dragon seeds in the show, it comes off as a more mocking and disingenuous on Daemon's side, and when you have Hugh just begging for a house, and Daemon threatening to give these highly important seats to them, you can understand if they start getting pissy and promises start sounding hollow. For the cherry on the shit sundae, she gathers the nobles of King's Landing and serves them rats. She cracks some great jokes. I'm amazed the gold cloaks didn't remove the knives and forks with what Rhaenyra had planned though. These nobles are lords of houses who may reside in King's Landing and have their own estate. Rhaenyra then has these estates raided for resources to distribute among the small folk. So let's keep count here. The small folk are likely on Rhaenyra's side. The nobles? They are pissed because they feel robbed. They were given no choice about handing things over and were insulted by being served rats. Torrhen Manderly, who is of the north, somehow gets thrown in with these nobles, but he reminds Rhaenyra that it was her blockade that caused all of this. This is just to show how he's a smarter guy and he'll likely play a bigger role in future episodes. Rhaenyra also demanded the greater houses pay tribute. They may be struggling for it considering they've been fighting a war. Especially those who answered Rhaenyra's call, they will be doubly pissed by paying a blood price and a gold price. Daemon though, he's in the empire building business. He's got grand visions of a Valyrian empire and expanding from Westeros to the far side of Essos. Daemon's taken the Targaryen line of being closer to gods than men very seriously. Rhaenyra then presents the small folks rations of food in front of the Sept, so you can add the faith to the list of powerful people who are going to be pissed. Basically, Rhaenyra's doing this as a show of power and to mock the Septon on his own doorstep. Taking a shit on his doorstep would have been more polite. It is again also another nice bit of juxtaposition because the last time we were here, Alicent was getting fish guts thrown at her. And that's enough for me. I've rambled enough. I really enjoyed this battle episode. Not much battles, but plenty of politicking, and I think it's just the beginning of the answer George set out for when he asked, what was Aragorn's tax policy? How noble and just are these kings and queens when they finally attain power?